Well, with me here in the studio is Fadel Abdul Ghany. He's the founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. In London, we have Ammar Waqqaf, the founder of Gnosos, a think tank focusing on Syria and the Middle East. In Ankara is Omer Ozkizilcik. He's an analyst at the SETA Foundation and the editor of Syrian Agenda, a Turkish website monitoring the conflict. And completing our panel from Washington, D.C. is Lawrance Korb. He's a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and was the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Defense under President Ronald Reagan and served in other administrations as well. Gentlemen, pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Fadel, let me start with you. Syria's prisons are terrible places. They were terrible places even before the war started. But when we see a prisoner swap now, Fadel, as part of the Astana process, does that tell you that we're moving towards a peace deal?
Not at all.
Why?
This is not actually detainees exchange at all. That's only very minor implementation of Astana. That's the regime still has more than 120,000 Syrian detainees. Almost lots of them, more than 82,000, are forced disappeared.
So we read the headlines, 9 for 9, 9 prisoners here, 9 prisoners there. Something positive's happening.
That's unacceptable from our side. This is not the clear process, first of all. We need to reveal the fate of the disappearance as a first step. Then every side should acknowledge what they have actually, which list they have. And this should be, the civil society should be engaged as a human rights defender, not only the Astana side. Where is the monitoring from the UN as well? So there is a lot of condition need to be established in this process actually. 9 from here, 17 from here. We are not talking about continuous process actually. And this swapping of those are not detainees, as I mentioned. Those are captured from this side and from this side. So they are looking for benefit, each side looking for his prisoners, which they are maybe military or forces or something like that. Not, we are talking about civilians. That's
right.
The release of detainees, really, actually.
Okay, Ammar, has Fadel accurately defined what the swap is about? And do you share his cynicism?
No, I don't, because looking at the bigger picture is it's very important to get the Astana process going forward. That trust is consolidated between different parties, and the Astana process itself is very much responsible for a lot of reduction of the bloodshed and destruction that marred Syria in the past 8 and 9 years. So this prisoner swap, though tiny, is probably significant in the sense that it is, in the sense of confidence building, it probably goes a step forward. So looking at the bigger picture, I would say we're moving forward, and the various parties of the Astana process, along with the Syrian government, I think they're building slowly but surely bridges of trust that would enable them to put an end to this crisis.
Lawrance Korb, is this the kind of micro issue that needs to be sorted out step by step in order to build trust?
Well, no doubt about it. I mean, it really needs to get going. I noticed that Ambassador Jeffries is now talking about, reinvigorating the Geneva process. Hopefully they can discuss it there. The United States is losing its leverage because of the fact that it has decided to cut down the number of U.S. forces. President Trump has tried to get 21 other countries to sign up. Very few of them are willing to do that. And even if we can stop the fighting in Syria, we've got a humanitarian situation that the world has to deal with it, not the least of which are a lot of the people being held in these camps right now.
Right. Omer, so for those who look at this from the outside and they say Turkey and Russia and the Iranians are putting all their energy into this process, and after all these months, the fruits of it are 9 prisoners here and 9 prisoners there. That seems to be nothing. Is that fair?
Yeah, actually, if we look on this case, it's actually nothing. So I would be something between what the previous commentators had said, that this incident, yes, is a small step forward in the Astana process, but the Astana process is much more than a prisoner exchange. But I don't think that this is single prisoner exchange will help facilitate the release of detainees in Assad regime prisons. Actually, there are so many that this is almost nothing. And over the recent years, the Syrian opposition had made many prisoner exchanges with the Assad regime, but there is a misbalance between both sides because the Assad regime has so many detainees in its prisons that even if all of the prisoners inside in the hands of the Syrian opposition would be exchanged, there would be still several thousands of detainees in Assad regime prisons, which are tortured day by day and raped. So I don't think that this is the right method to solve this issue. I think there needs to be a general amnesty from the Assad regime side, and this has to be the goal, not an equal, balanced prisoner exchange.
Okay, so Ammar, the man's right, isn't he? When we look at something like Saidnaya, the notorious prison where Amnesty says more than 13,000 people have been killed since the start of the war. There is a massive imbalance here between other forces, whether they are from the Free Syrian Army, Hayat Tahrir Sham, whoever they might be, the SDF and their prisoners, and what is an institutional imprisonment and torture of people under the Assad regime.
Well, we've heard so many reports coming out and accusing the Syrian government of all sorts of things. They are pretty much based on certain and individual testimonies, which is fine. People have been tortured. We've heard this over and over again. Fine. To jump forward and say this has been pretty much systematic needs a proof. We just cannot claim this per se. I personally need to be convinced. But let me give you the other point of view. A lot of the Syrian, there are other Syrians who have stood against what you call the revolution. They've been expecting, for example, when Ghouta was liberated, to get something between 4,500 and 5,000 detainees by the Free Syrian Army or Jaish al-Islam and whatever in Ghouta, and only 200 came out. So there is a lot of research to be made on both sides, so to speak.
Okay.
And it's not only one side that is suffering.
Fadel Abdul Ghany, it's not systematic, and everybody has blood on their hands, or everybody has the torture and the detaining of prisoners on their hands, and maybe it's not so bad on the Assad side, according to Ammar. What do you think, Fadel?
If he doesn't believe in what Syrian Network for Human Rights have as a national organization and our database, let's go to the Commission of Inquiry and 37 report. From the first report, they mentioned that the violation from the Syrian regime is systematic and widespread based on, now they have more than 4,000 interviews, direct interviews with the released victims. This is the first one. Okay, let's move the Commission of Inquiry, which is like forbidden to enter Syria from the Assad regime. Let's move to the General Assembly and go to the resolution of all the General Assembly resolution towards Syria. It's all condemned the systematic and the widespread torture and for enforced disappearance from the Syrian government. It's mentioned in all resolution. Let's move for international organization like Amnesty International. So we have tens of thousands of evidence, and Human Rights Watch, and all of them, they mentioned that this is systematic, and we need to compare the scale. Actually, as I mentioned, Assad regime has above than 120,000. All the other party, they have less than 15,000 based on our database, and that's showing actually the scale of the people who has been arrested or disappeared. The second issue, we need to compare also the outcome. The outcome was that the torture still taking place actually while the Astana is processing. And as you mentioned, how much the total exchange of from the prisoner in Astana process, how much? Less than 500. That's what, if we need to continue like this, we need like more than 100 years and almost they will gonna to die due to torture.
Right. Let me ask you then, is there any level of acceptance you will have for dealing with Assad until there is accountability for what's happening in the prisons?
Yes, of course there is, but I'm refusing the word of amnesty. Assad is a criminal and accused criminal, actually, from the several bodies of international human rights organization. So he's unaccepted to give amnesty, actually. He is accused of crimes against humanity and war crime as a leader of the Syrian army. So this is the first point.
You want accountability.
We want accountability. No, not before,
process.
but till now there is process and there is pressure should be taking place. For example, the sanction. Now the effect of sanction is finally. And referring to the sanction, I need here to mention the information that till this moment, in spite of all those crimes against humanity and war crimes from Assad regime, the UN or the UN Security Council doesn't implement sanction against Assad regime. It's only from United States, EU, Turkish government, Canadian, individual.
Russia and China, yes.
Yeah,
but that's politics, right?
That's politics.
Right.
But this sanction will affect and will pressure the regime. It might be like eliminate the sanction and release those detainees and saving their life. And we need to remind also what happened with the death certificate when the Assad regime is simply announced through civil registry, which is like institution in the Syrian government, and announced about 900 cases for the families that, okay, your children or your father or your relative just dead through the civil registry. What is this? How this regime dealing with the population?
Ammar?
Yeah, I mean, the sanctions are not going to prevent President Assad from buying, the next PlayStation to his kid or whatever. It's the Syrian people who are getting hurt, and the Syrian people who did not join with the revolution for valid fears against their beings, against their interests, and so on and so forth. We need to acknowledge that calling for these sanctions from the very beginning affected ordinary people. It didn't affect what you call the regime or the high-ranking people. Nobody is condoning torture, by the way. Torture is endemic in the whole region. It's probably the case because Syria is under war that is dividing the country and everything, that we see it on a much larger scale. But the other parties in that war aren't really clean-handed as well. And if you tell me that, this is systemic, I need a proof. That's all that is to say. Hundreds of thousands of people have been affected, yes. Tens of thousands being imprisoned, questioned, I would say yes. But at the end of the day, let's not turn this into, what people try to do is...
But the man gave you a list of organizations, including the Commission of Inquiry. Let me bring in Omer Ozkizilcik because, Omer, you're shaking your head in disagreement. Tell me why.
Yeah, because it's almost funny to claim that there is no proof and that he needs proof. There are thousands of proof, and it's like denying the existence of the sun, that to deny the systemic torture in the Assad regime prisons. There are actual inmates' pictures who were leaked, and it's a known fact. Yeah, I don't want to discuss this anymore. So if he cannot accept this and needs another proof, I think there's something different in play here. However, if we go into the systemic torture of the Assad regime, there is also one important aspect, and this is the strategy of war the Assad regime used to rape the prisoners, especially women prisoners. And there are thousands of women being raped in the prisons of the Assad regime, and who came out with a child in their hands. And also male prisoners are being raped by the Assad regime, and most of them are ashamed of speaking about it. So we have all of these, and I think here we need to focus on releasing these unjustified prisoners. But however, I think we need also a realistic approach. It's hard to convince the Assad regime to release these prisoners, as they have used it as a strategy since the very beginning. Therefore, and also even before, and therefore I would argue that an amnesty declared by the Assad regime is a more face-saving option for the Assad regime, which can be achieved if we look on this from a realistic point of view. But however, if the word would be just, the Assad regime have to be on the International Criminal Court only for this torture alone, it would be enough.
Larry Korb, as we look at all sides and claims against all sides regarding prisoners and torture, we look at the SDF, the US ally. Folded within the SDF is the YPG, considered by Turkey to be a terrorist group. Strong claims that they are torturing those who are suspected of being Daesh or ex-Daesh and doing terrible things to them. Is there no real appetite from the Americans to look at that because these guys helped defeat ISIS?
Unfortunately, you're right. I mean, the United States a long time ago made a decision really not to play a major role in Syria. We only got involved after ISIS started in Iraq and then came over and made their capital in Raqqa. And our goal was to defeat ISIS. And unfortunately, we haven't paid much attention to these other issues. We've had a couple of people who were ISIS who've tried to come back to the United States. We already turned down one person. We're trying to help get people that we've captured from other countries to go back, but a lot of other countries are afraid to have them. They don't know how they can prosecute them. And unfortunately, I think when this conflict ends, it's going to have to be the major powers, Turkey, Russia, the United States, who basically have a ceasefire, set up a federal system, and basically are going to let a lot of people get away with things that they shouldn't have done. But the fact of the matter is, Assad's going to stay in power, and because he will, he is never going to be punished for the things that he has done. So that's the best we can hope for, is have a ceasefire and have a federal state in which you can have safe areas for a lot of the people who have suffered needlessly. And I think a lot of people in Syria and Iraq, who comprise the majority of people that are being held in these camps, are going to have to allow to go back to their normal lives. Hopefully, the Geneva meeting will accomplish something, but I'm not very optimistic given the little leverage that the United States has.
Right. And let me ask you, Professor Korb, looking at the disagreement over prisoners here, just looking at that one issue as a microcosm for the disagreement over the other political issues, over choosing a constitutional committee and so on, not being able to agree on names. With this in mind, how hard is it going to be for all stakeholders to agree on the members of a constitutional committee getting together and deciding on a roadmap to peace?
Well, I think it's going to be the good news is basically I think the Russians are tired of their involvement there, given the other problems that they have at home with their economy. So the United States does not want to get rid of Assad like they talked about earlier. So I think that they can come to some sort of agreement to deal with this. The United States and Russia have a lot of other issues. For example, the extension of the New START agreement, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces agreement. So I think if they can work those out, this can be part of it. But it's not going to be easy. And President Trump basically wants to cut down American involvement around the world. And he's up to him, we would have been out of Syria completely by now. So it's going to be very, very difficult to make that happen. So hopefully you can come to some sort of agreement. I have more optimism about the Geneva process than the Astana, and basically get some sort of ceasefire that's not acceptable to everybody, but at least stops the killing for now.
Okay. We've got the final 2 minutes of this segment. I want to get final comments from Fadel, Ammar, and Omer. So please, gentlemen, if you can keep it brief, all of you, I'd appreciate it. Fadel, Geneva, a better process than Astana, according to Larry. You agree with that?
Without pressure, Assad will not implement at all with any negotiation. He's just wasting time with his allies, the Russian included, and the Iranian as well. Just what's happened in Ghouta, sees Ghouta again, sees Daraa, Homs. Now only the remaining is Idlib, and still now today is shelling Jisr al-Shughur and keep firing Idlib as well, killing civilians. So without pressure, real pressure, economic and political, and if that not succeed, we'll need to move to the military pressure based on the UN League actually, and that's based on Chapter 39, 41, and 42.
The Americans?
If it's out of the coalition, out of the UN, same what's happened is in Bosnia through NATO, that will be also accepted.
But that's NATO versus Russia.
Yeah, to protect the civilians actually in Syria, not against Russian, but to protect the human rights, protection, allowed military intervention and allowed sanction and allowed. Without that, Geneva will fail, and it's failed now. It's 10 round without any achievement at all, even release one prisoner.
Right. Ammar.
Yeah, people can have as much wishful thinking as they like. What we hear actually that President Assad is being recognized as being there for a long time, and this is official, and this is coming from high-ranking officials throughout, the world. And I really cannot see what the Syrian government can be pushed to do with whatever pressure. I mean, they've been trying to push it to do something for the past 8 years with tremendous pressure, with arming of militia and whatever, and nothing happened. So the best way forward is to get some common interests woven between certain countries. Definitely the Astana process is a way forward, much better than Geneva. Geneva, the people who are sitting at the other side of the table in Geneva, we have to understand they're not recognized by the Syrian people. They don't represent much, and we can't, put them into much hope, to be honest.
Omer, wrap us up.
So I would say we have only the Astana process because Geneva was basically dead, and that Turkey and the United States of America Syrian policy drive apart from each other. So I think if the US has an interest in reintegration the Geneva process, the US needs to sort out its difference with Turkey over the Syrian branch of the PKK. And until now, despite its mistakes and failures and weaker sides, the Astana process is the only efficient international process regarding Syria.
Okay, we'll keep a close eye on the proposed peace talks, see what comes out of it. For the moment, let me thank you, gentlemen, Fadel Abdul Ghany, Ammar Waqqaf, Omer Ozkizilcik, and Lawrance Korb. Thanks so much for joining us.